Hello and welcome back to the Developer Direct RAD Mobile Development Kickstart series, and we're now into lesson 5 where we're going to be looking at building some SOAP servers. SOAP is a protocol for sending and receiving data over HTTP and HTTPS using XML, and so we're going to be looking at how we can use and consume SOAP through RAD Studio. We'll also have a look at using JSON. It's quite popular that feeds are provided out in JSON format, so we'll also be looking at how we can use that and an example of a JSON feed actually running. So let's say this is lesson 5. So if you are joining us partway through, I definitely recommend watching each of the sessions in turn just to build up your knowledge as we go through. And lesson 6, which is the one following on from this one, we'll be pulling a number of the different bits together to tie the season off. So it really will aid you if you've been able to watch each of them through. Also make sure you are getting involved on the streaming.embarcadero.com site to be able to pick up the extra resources around each of the lessons. Now, if you are watching this live, then please do join us with the chat on Twitter on hashtag EMBTDD. All you need to do is just put that little bit of text into your tweet and it will join the conversation automatically for you. Simple as that. Also, if you have any questions or if there's any resources that you've seen but can't locate, or you're wondering how best to approach something, then feel free to email us through on developerdirect.online@embarcadero.com and we'll be happy to point you in the right direction. Okay, so let's get into building and accessing SOAP and JSON. So through this lesson, we're going to learn about SOAP. We're going to build a SOAP server to start off. And as we do that, we're going to be exploring and discussing around the edges what SOAP interfaces are. We've already been introduced in lesson 3 to the concept of interfaces. Interfaces have been around for a long time before they even hit the mobile area. And we're going to look at how, in the same way we use them as a contract between objects that then provide us functionality on specific platforms, with SOAP we have a contract that provides us an interface to talk to the SOAP server. So we can use the same concept to work with SOAP servers, and we'll be exploring through that and how using multiple interfaces within the same application is sometimes actually very beneficial to break out different business functionality. We'll look at the different data types that we can send around on SOAP, and we'll then, once we've built our SOAP server, we'll then go ahead and we'll build a client and we'll consume that SOAP server. Now, when you consume the SOAP server, we do that using a WSDL document, which is a web service definition language or description language. It pulls down what is that interface, tells us about the different types and everything else that goes along with it. And that's then converted into a set of classes and the ability to go and get the interface, so you can programmatically code to it in Delphi as you would any other interface that we've been working to. Once we've built some clients using SOAP as well, we'll then finish off by exploring around and consuming JSON. And I'm going to do this using an example of some code that's been put together, and I'll point you to where you can go and get that code as well, which is for the propertycross.com example. And there's an extended video if you want to find out more about the propertycross.com project from CodeRage. So just go to embarcadero.com/CodeRage. Now, SOAP is just part of our multi-tier capabilities within RAD Studio, and very much we'll be following on with the second half of the multi-tier story in the following video, which will be lesson 6 on if you're watching this live on Thursday. Now, as part of the multi-client, multi-platform, multi-tier approach, then you can use and create client applications using FireMonkey, using HD and 3D applications for Win32 and for Win64. And you can also create Mac applications and iOS applications using FireMonkey. Now, for the VCL, then we very much, if you're just using the VCL, then you've got access to Win32 for Delphi and C++ Builder now. That's there for kind of the VCL applications. You can consume SOAP or DataSnap into those applications as well. You can also have console applications that talk to multi-tier, middle tiers. The web service client access allows you to consume web services that have not only been written in Delphi but also in other languages. So SOAP is an industry standard, a bit like HTTP is a standard. SOAP is a standard as well, and any application that's producing SOAP compliant data out, you can go ahead and access through Delphi. Now, also building onto the back of what we can connect up to, there's a number of components that allow you to do cloud storage and hook up to the Amazon S3 and the Windows Azure cloud services. So you can do kind of the NoSQL databases, you can use the blob storage and a whole load of other things up there. So if you're trying to access into remote data, and that's the reason for having a multi-tier approach, then obviously using Amazon or Azure may be another option, although DataSnap and web services tend to be a bit more popular at the moment. Certainly from an iOS point, if you need to store data off device securely, somewhere that's backed up automatically, then using the NoSQL tables is quite a popular option for pushing data off device. Okay, so the way multi-tier development works is there's 3 tiers. Now, the first tier is your data tier. So you'll have your servers that have got your databases on. Now, they could be inside your corporate firewall. They could be on the same machine as your middle tier. The middle tier is where all your business logic goes into. And this middle tier is the bridge between your clients and your database. So the business logic and methods that you expose through your middle tier become the functionality that's available for clients to talk to. And all that business logic that you write is then used by all different clients if they're used for iOS, for Windows, for Mac, if they're used in PHP, if they're used in JavaScript, if they're used in C#, in Objective-C, wherever they're connecting into, whatever language you're using, however you're connecting in, that same business logic is there and managed. So the great thing about having a middle tier is that if you want to have functionality that checks the length of names, checks details around email addresses for @ and full stops and the lengths of the bits after the full stop, or wants to do address verification or any data verification or data work or manipulation work, and you always want to do that in a constant way, then you can expose out that business logic, an entry point to that business logic that allows it to run underneath. So you can test, you can develop, make sure your business logic is working, and then once you've got your business logic working, you can then connect whatever clients you want to it. And all the clients need to worry about really is the functionality of displaying that data and passing the data back and responding to the response that you get from trying to do things. So it makes programming the clients a lot easier. And if you wanted to outsource part of building your clients, then it certainly makes it a lot easier. Or if you've got a junior development force, then it makes it a lot easier for them to program into your systems without breaking things by not being aware of the bigger picture, because the middle tier should be controlling that. So what is SOAP and how are we able to use it to provide middle tiers? Well, as we said, SOAP is a standard defined by W3C. It's been defined since 2003. And in fact, Delphi 6 originally had SOAP support before that point a long time ago. So it's been around the Delphi world for a very, very long time. SOAP allows us to marshal method calls and is using XML encoding to pass data packets back and forth. And it passes this over HTTP, or you can pass it over HTTPS. Now, there's a number of different versions of SOAP, but the great thing is SOAP 1.1 and 1.2 are fully supported by Rad Studio. Now, to build a SOAP server, there's a wizard, and there's a link on the screen to the wizard, and also on the resources on the streaming.embarcadero.com site. And the wizard will take you through the first basic steps of setting up a blank application that you can then go ahead and start debugging with. Now, the wizard options give you 4 choices: a VCL standalone application, which when I'm debugging and testing things, I always use that as my start point. The other option is a console standalone application, which I occasionally use, but I tend to prefer for debugging using the VCL application. There's also the possibility to create an Azapi DLL. Now, an Azapi DLL is great for deploying out under iOS, and it means once you've deployed it, anytime the machine reboots or comes back up, it's just there, it's part of iOS that's going to automatically start up. And there's also CGI standalone executables. You can create stuff into services and so on as well. Now, let's have a quick look at building a SOAP server, and we'll then come back and have a look at accessing into it from a client point. Okay, so I'm just going to go here, File, New, and I'm going to go to Other. So I'm going to be building a different type of application to one of the ones I've got in my standard list. Now, within here, under Delphi or under C++ Builder, there's Web Services, and you can create here a SOAP server application. And here's those 4 choices that we were talking about. So as I say, we're going to test and debug things here. So I'm just going to use a standalone VCL application. Now, the second page is just asking me to give it a port to test on. We use port 8080 here. And if I wanted to use HTTPS, then I could tick that box. And then I'd just need to apply in my certificates to ensure that I was running HTTPS. But that'll do for now, so let's just finish. Now this is creating a blank application for me. It's got my form that we can see on the screen there for starting and stopping the server. Also a link to open up in a web browser, a link to the web services. There's a menu that's automatically created for you directly from the application, and we'll have a look at the web module unit in a moment. But before we get there, it's asking, do we want to create an interface for a SOAP module? So I'm going to say yes. And what I need to do now is provide a name for my service. So we'll call this my first SOAP service. And I'm going to generate some comments in here which are quite useful for working way through. And I'm also going to say here, generate me some sample methods, because I want to have some examples to have a look at, which I can take away afterwards, but it's just quite useful. Now, we can have a service application activation model, which is either a global one or a per request. Typically, per request is the way to go, so let's just go ahead and choose that. And that's gone ahead and created me 2 files that have appeared in my project group. We can see here we've got my first SOAP service implementation, the IMPL file, and then the interface, the INTF file. Now the interface here is defining my interface. Every interface that's defined will have a GUID, so you need to make sure that if you do create a new interface, don't just go and copy and paste one from here. You can press Control-Shift-G to generate a new GUID if you need one. And this has provided me with a contract here that's got 4 different methods on it, and this passes through constant values. It uses the const here just to make things a little bit faster and more efficient. And my method here is called echo enum, and that's going to take a value which is a tenum test, and we can see up here what tenum test provides. This is an enumerated type list, and it's just going to pass it back. I've got no implementation here. We need to go and see where this is implemented in a moment. But what you notice on the end here, it says std call, standard call. So when we have invocable interfaces that we're using, if we're producing Win32 versions, then we need to mark these up with standard call so it knows to export these methods so they're callable from outside our SOAP project externally. If you produce a 64-bit version, then the standard call becomes irrelevant in 64-bit land, so it will actually just ignore them. But you can leave them there and the compiler knows to do what it needs to do. Okay, so we've got a few different methods here. Let's see what else we've got coming through. We've got passing a double array. Now a double array, I can't type in here array of double because that's not a specific type. But what I can do is I can define a type which is t-double-array, which is an array of double, and then I can pass that. That allows this to then pass through and be defined through the web service description languages. And it also allows me to return back an instance of t-double-array. Okay, now we also have an echo my employee here. So that's just going to return back the same value that's passed in. Now, my employee, again, is a defined type. It's not a simple type like a string or an integer or a double or a float or something. So my employee here is a class. Now the class is of type t-remotable, and this is important when we're using SOAP. Any objects that we want to send out to the client need to be of an instance of t-remotable. That way, once it's sent, the object will be automatically freed on the server side, so because we can't actually free it before it's sent, so the server will manage that for us. Now, SOAP also is about sending simple objects. So here you'll notice the read and the write is updating the local value. We've not got complexity where the write is doing business logic within there. That can't be passed and transferred through multiple different languages. So simple objects are basically simple objects here. It's just updating its local values. Now, what we can do within SOAP, we can have inheritance. So we could have my super employee, which equals a class of t-remotable, or actually we could just have my employee, and we could have an additional property in here for let's just put an ID of an integer, read FID, write FID. So the my super employee, or maybe we could change this to my saved employee. There we are. We can pass in an employee object, and then when we request an employee by ID, so we could have here a function to get employee by ID, have a constant of AID, which we can have as an integer, and that can send back T my saved employee. So that now would return back an employee, so we'd have all this data on it, plus an ID property that we could go and set on the object. So you can use inheritance, that's not a problem. But when you want to pass values back and forth, you need to make sure that somewhere along the line they are t-remotable object from the root. Now you could also have on here, we can have a property, my friends, which could be a t my employee, or actually we could make that my boss, and read f my boss, and write f my boss. So we could you can have objects passed as objects within objects. So we could still be returning a my employee that's going to return back this object, plus it'll have on there another object as part of this object. So you can have some complexity in the structure, but the actual objects themselves are very simple objects at the bottom line of it. So there's quite a flexible architecture we have here around the SOAP interface definition. So let's go and have a look at the implementation we have now. So here we have in the implementation file, we have a reference to the interface, and we have a class defined as an invocable class, so we can actually create an instance of this remotely, and it has on here the interface for my first SOAP service defined as part of its contract. So it's saying I'm an invocable class and I support this interface. Now you could have, my other interface, if you wanted to have multiple interfaces in this one class, but typically we wouldn't go that way. So here we have the definitions, and then you have the implementations underneath, as you would define any class. So I'm just going to come in here and I'm just going to comment out this because I don't want to have that preventing me compiling in here at the moment. So let's just check that we're able to compile. And if we go ahead and run this, I'm just going to say yes to allow access to this site. Open this in a browser. And what this is going to do is it's going to provide us a root service information page where we can find out about our interfaces. So we've got the WSDL document here for the my first SOAP service, and we can click on it here. We can see what the different methods are. If we have a look at the WSDL, then this page here gives us the XML definition of what our service does. So we can see in here that we've got defined a simple type, which is a TEnums test, which has a restriction base of a string, and it has a number of enumeration values, so none, a few, some, a lot, and so on. We have a complex type, which is a T-double array, and it is an array of double values. We can see here the array type is of double. We can see we've got another complex type, which is T my employee, with last name, first name, salary, and so on. Now we can see that the T super employee hasn't been included here because it's not actually used, because I commented out that instance where it's used, it's not actually used as part of the interface, so it will be excluded. There are methods that you can do. We're not going to cover them today, but there are some advanced steps that you can do to force them to be included through, just by registering the type. So if you do need to go down that route, then you can do that. So if you wanted a base person with multiple different types of people, and you wanted a call to get person by their ID and pass different types through, and referencing that you've got a base type there, then you can do that, and then you can check and you can typecast to see if they are actually of a specific type of person as well. But that's kind of an advanced topic that we're not going to have time to cover in today's session. So what can we do with this WSDL document? Well, let's pop back to our slides and we'll then come back and we'll show you how we can actually consume this and use it to create a client. So creating a client application, we can do that with VCL, we can do it with FireMonkey, we can do it with a console application, we could do it in a web broker application. Any type of application you can create with RAD Studio, you can pretty much go and create a client for calling SOAP inside. Now, using the WSDL importer, which is under File, New, Other, and then under the web services on the client applications, you'll be able to see a link to the WSDL importer. You can then import, using the URL that we've got, the service. So there's a couple that are linked here that we could go ahead and use. So there's one for webservicesx.net for weather forecast. This is an ASMX, so I'm guessing it's probably written in .net or something. So this has got a description around it. In fact, if we just go ahead and copy that and let's open it up in Chrome, here we can see what the actual WSDL is. So here we could go ahead and import this, and we can see in here that there's a get weather by zip code response, there's a get weather by zip code. So you can ask for something and then you get a response object. Now this is quite common, being able to code and having a response object that defines what's happened on the server and gives you some data. There's weather forecast, which is a sequence of different values. There's an array of weather data and so on. So you can import this in and that will give you a set of Delphi methods to work with. Okay, so let's go back. So we're going to use the WSDL importer. Let's just copy the one that we have from here locally. And in our project group, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a new project to the same project group. And let's do this with a FireMonkey mobile application. And we'll just use a header footer template here. Let's just save that in. And to this project, let's go File, New, Other, and under Web Services, we can see we've got the WSDL importer because we're a client application now. Well, in fact, we've got an application open. Originally, we didn't have an application open, which is why we couldn't see it. You can import WSDLs to servers as well. So let's go ahead and just paste our URL in and go next. Now there's options in here to add in username, password and proxy if you need them for connecting through. You can tell it to specifically provision using a specific SOAP protocol or just to do it automatically. And there's a number of options around how you want it to treat enumerated types, if you want them scoped or not, and so on. So there's a number of different options you can use here. 99% of the time you're just going to hit finish. You're not going to need to actually map anything through for different things. So this is now generated for us a unit of code, and it tells us here that it's been imported, where it's been imported from, and the date time that it's been imported. It defines the types that are being used. So it tells me we've got a class that's going to be completed through here. This is a forward declaration that there's going to be a class coming. So we've got a tMyEmployee class, we've got a tenumTest class, so we can see here this is matching in the values of what would be available. We've got a tMyEmployee, and this has been picked up as a tremotable with different value types. And it's then got the interface. Now what it also includes is a function here to get an instance of that interface. So we want to be able to program to this interface. Well, first we need an instance of the interface. So there's a method here that takes some parameters. You can pass in if you want to use WSDL document. You can pass in an overriding address. So if you're going to be posting this out publicly, then obviously localhost isn't going to work. You'd need to pass through the live address of the URL. If you have a client who maybe has their own instance of this server running, maybe you're an ISV and you produce some software for different customers and they all have their own systems, then you can pass in where that customer system is located so it knows where to go. And you can also pass in a HTTP REO, which is a component that will be implementing the interface. So if you want to explore that code, all it's doing is basically generating the connection and setting the HTTP REO to point to the interface that we want it to be. So in our application here, all we need to do is say under the uses that we want to use the my first SOAP service 1 unit, and then let's put a button on the form, and let's put a spin box, and let's just do a simple on click here. Now we can call the get myFirstSOAP service method that's implemented in the myFirstSOAP unit. Again, we can pass in now use WSDL or SOAP. SOAP is faster than using WSDL. If you use WSDL, it's got to go fetch that first, verify what it's doing, and then send it. If you've already got that installed, then just use SOAP. It's much faster than using the WSDL. So we'd have false, and we could then put an address in, and then there's an optional, again, these are all optional parameters. You can see that by the little square brackets around them. If I wanted to pass in a specific HTTP REO, then I'd need to complete the first two optional parameters, but I don't want to do that, so that's fine. The great thing is that being an interface, once the interface instance goes out of scope, it will automatically free it. So we don't need to worry about any of the memory management on whatever platform. Interfaces will just decrease the count to the interface and free it from usage afterwards. So here we can see the different methods that are exposed. So let's do an echo, let's echo a double, and I'm going to pass in the spinbox1 dot value. And where are we going to put this? Well, let's we've got a label at the top of the screen. I think it's called a header label. There we are. And let's just set the text of that to be this to string. So let's go ahead and run. Okay, so this brings me to my first issue, is that my IP address on here is going to be looking for localhost. This is going to fail. It's going to say, oh, can't connect to localhost to do anything there. So I need to actually do a loop back to my local my development machine. So let's go and find its IP address. So I've opened up a command prompt here, and just typing in ipconfig, I can find here I've got 172.168.116.219. So that's my local IP address. So let's go ahead and say, right, we don't want to use WSDL document. We're going to use SOAP. Now the next thing I need to do is give it the IP address, or the full address actually of the server. So to find that, if you come in here, I've said I don't want to use the WSDL document. I want to use the URL instead because this is faster. Let's just update this here. Was it 172.168.116.219? So that would actually be enough. I could just leave that like that and that would work. Or the other thing that I can do is I can copy this whole path and I could put it in here, and then it doesn't matter what's written inside, it's going to use this. So depending on what you're doing, you could just pass in a constant that has your path in it, and that'd probably be the thing that I'd recommend doing as you write the code up. Okay, so let's go ahead and try and rerun this. Now I could, obviously I could just go ahead and check on a local host connection first. So add target platform Win32. And there we are. Yeah, that's working here locally. So the IP address seems to be okay. Let's run it out to the simulator now. So let's go ahead and set this to 3. Let's go ahead and set it to 35, 350. Aha! Well, I think my value edit here has got a maximum of 100 set on it. That's one of the properties. So great. We can see that it's doing as it should do. Let's go back and have a look at what else we could do here. So let's go and grab and have a look at picking up this WSDL document. Let's just open that up. Here we are. Take the URL and go ahead and file new other WSDL importer. Paste in the URL. Tell it to automatically provision the protocol, and here it is. So we've got a few different constants that have been defined. We can see that there's a few different classes that are going to be in here, and then it's got indexes for picking up specific values within a, so you can have multiple different days depending on the index here. So this has gone ahead and generated out what we need it to do. Now the great thing about this is actually, if we go and have a look at the destroy here, there's some times when you're going to have objects within the object. This will actually set up the destruction of those objects when you free this one here. So if you do go fetch an object and then you just free the object, it will free any of the children that are within it. So this is great. We've now got an interface here that we can call the methods that are exposed by getWeather by zip code or getWeather by place name, and we can see what it's going to return. There's also another interface in here that we can go ahead and call, and different methods for connecting to and giving us an instance of those interfaces. So yeah, very easy to go ahead and configure and use these services now. And we just add weather forecast as a usage and go ahead and work with it. The one thing I was going to do is I was going to show you how to add an additional interface in. So let's just go back and I'm just going to recreate this sample application. Say yes to add an interface, Michael interface. Now if we wanted to create additional interfaces, you can go File, New, Other, and you'll then find on a SOAP server application you've got the ability to import WSDL. You've got a SOAP server data module, so you can actually pass data out using client datasets and providers data through SOAP. If you're going to do that, then I'd probably say look at DataSnap. It is a lot better for that type of thing. If you're wanting to expose functions and methods, then you can go ahead here and use the SOAP server interface. So let's create another one, and let's call this account, or let's call this POS. So we've got a point of sale system. So we have a point of sale system in here. Let's go have another one and create a SOAP interface, and we can call this stock control. So we can go ahead and we can create multiple different interfaces in here. And this is quite useful because you can actually departmentalize out specific functionality, make it easier to work with, just like you wouldn't put all the methods onto a single interface within your normal desktop code. You can create as many interfaces as you want, and what that will do is we'll just go ahead and let's just put in here a function foo, which is just going to return a string, standard call, and let's pop that into the implementation here, and Control-Shift-C to complete it. Result equals foo. And stock control, let's just leave that one empty for the moment. And just close the old server, rerun. Now the great thing now is that we can see all the different interfaces in here. We can go ahead and we can view the WSDL for them. Now this is great because we can now departmentalize out different functionality and have it called for different, have it easily called and have it very easy to locate the kind of functionality that you're looking for. Now, the one thing that I would say when you're programming interfaces is you don't want to get to the point that you come in here and say, right, I need to change foo. I want to actually pass something into it. So I'm going to pass in a foo, which is a string, and I want to pass that back. That's going to break the interface that you've already got defined. In fact, you'd come and start from the interface here to implement that change. So what I often say is, and this is where the sample interface is very good, it's very good to have objects that you pass in and pass back. So I would always have a my result object, which should be a class of t-remotable, and I would call this, I'd have a result in here, which would be whatever it is, and maybe a result object that has got t my employee, and then let's imagine t-enum test is a set of values saying everything's worked on the server, or it's failed, or there's parameters that are missing, or whatever else. Build up a response object that you can pass back that then provides rich data to the end user to tell them what's happened. Now, you can just have an integer defined and then pass back an error code that people have then got to look up and work out what the error code means. Obviously, it's a lot easier to code sometimes with enums and say, right, this is what's happened out of what we'd expect to happen. The only problem with that is if you need to add something, you've then got to update an additional enum and republish it. But so there's pros and cons of going either way around. But it's definitely good to have an object that you return back, because if you do need to then add anything to it, you can just add a new property. So obviously these would be properties with read and write set on them, but you could add a new property of missing values, which could be a string array, for example. So you can add stuff to the object. That's not going to break the interface, because the interface defines that it's going to be returning back an object of this type, and it still is returning an object of this type. And the great thing about SOAP is because it's XML based, if you then are passing this to an old client that's not been updated to use the new values, it will still work. It won't break the interface. But if I did go ahead and rename this to result object, then that will break the interface. So just think about the names that you give things and how you publish things through. But it's always very good, a good practice to have objects that you pass in and pass back. Okay, so let's have a go together at building a client application that's going to talk to a web service here. So this is a published web service that's a demo web service that Pavel, who's one of my colleagues, has running on an Amazon Web Service instance. And this is a Delphi web service application that has a couple of expressions in there for managing regular expressions, and one of them in particular checks the content of an email address is correct. So without having to contain that business logic within our application, we can call it very quickly to check that with the predefined business logic on the server that our email address is valid. And obviously, as always, if there's any problem with the business logic, we can then just update the server side without having to change the client and then get that change in business logic integrated in. Okay, so we're going to use the WSDL that's linked there. So if you open up a web browser and go to 79.125.25.31 8902, so that's port 8902, /WSDL. That should be enough to open up in the browser the first page, and then just /ireg expressions, or you can just click on the ireg expressions section there. So I'm going to just open this up here. Whoop. So if you open it in Safari, you'll probably kind of just get a bit of description text. I'm going to go and I'll just open it up here in Chrome so we can actually see it. And again, if you just go to the WSDL page, then you can just click on this ireg expressions. So the main thing, as before, just copy the WSDL path. Now let's go into our Rad Studio and create a new mobile application. Now it doesn't matter which template you choose. I'm just going to use a header footer one here. And I'm going to put a clearing edit onto the form. That saves me kind of having to put code in for selecting and deleting all the text. I'm just going to use some anchors here to anchor that to the right as well, so it's nicely positioned whichever orientation we work on. And let's put in a button. And let's change the text of the button to be check email. And on the clearing edit, let's just select it and go and change the keyboard type and change that to email address. So we're going to be typing in an email address. We might as well get the best keyboard up automatically for us. And again, on the button, I'm just going to remove the left anchor so it keeps it in the middle. Perfect. Okay, on the button, let's double click. And in here, we're just going to put a couple of / just to hold that position there. And we need to now have the WSDL imported and ready to use. So let's go File, New, Other, and under Web Services, WSDL Importer. And if you paste in your WSDL document link into the location of WSDL file or URL, choose Next, Next, and Finish. You should now have within your project ireg expressions 1. So if you just copy the unit name and then add a uses section. So underneath implementation, and before your procedure, type uses and then type in ireg expressions 1 and full colon. And that will tell it to use that unit of code. And then in here, we're just going to show a message if the email address is okay or not. So let's go ahead and say if, and if we type get iReg expressions, and this is the method that's come in. Remember, the default is get and then interface name for the actual getting the interface handle. And we don't need to put any paths in because it's using the correct path and it's a live path, it's not changing. So we can just do dot is valid email address. So we can see here there's an is match and is valid email address. So you can put a value and a pattern as two input strings there and get a value Boolean back if it matches that that regular expression. So we're going to do is valid email address, and we need to pass in the value. So that's going to be clearing edits 1.text, then show message email okay, else show message, and I'm a bit of a Simpsons fan, so I'm just going to put "don't" for an incorrect email address, and I'm just going to save all. So that should be it. So we're getting an instance of the interface. We're able to pass in the values without having the business logic within our application. All we've got is this imported WSDL document, and here we can see the interface, the function that's automatically generated that we know is going to be there. And if we go ahead and run this now, we now get into our simulator, the application. So let's try typing in an email address here. We can see we've got the nice keyboard for email addresses. Hello at embarcadero.com. And we can see that matches the right format. We're not doing a live check of the actual email address on the exchange, but we're doing a validation of the pattern of the email address. But if we take off this down to just a single character at the end, we can see this isn't passing a sanity check. There should be at least 2 characters at the end there for it to be a valid email address. So that's failing the pattern. And if we just kind of completely just link this down a bit further, still getting dull. But we could have this .org.uk, and that does match a pattern. So it's using a regular expression just to check the pattern of the email address is okay. But that's working great, and I've not got to write any of that code within my application here. Okay, so I did promise that we'd have a look at some JSON and using JSON documents before we finished off. And in fact, I've got a web page opened up down here. Let's go there. If we go to Code Central, so it's cc.embarcadero.com, CC is short for Code Central, and in there, item number 29456 is some Delphi JSON viewer, parser and document classes and components. And if you go and download that, then this will make working with JSON a lot easier. I've done the hard work for you, created a set of interfaces that allow you to explore a JSON document in a very similar way to being able to explore an XML document. And because they are quite similar. And I had to do this recently on some work that I was doing on a multi-platform project called Property Cross. And the link for that will be up on the resources, along with the link for this this Code Central entry. And what this allowed me to do is take some JSON that I've downloaded from the web, pass through it, work out the structure internally, and then convert that text into a set of objects that I can query and work with programmatically. So let's have a look at how we do that and how the kind of JSON stuff works. So JSON it's a JavaScript object notation, and although it talks about JavaScript, it's actually an open standard, and it's made to be designed for humans to be able to read and inter-exchange data. Using it as a standard, we're able to actually work through it and read data in a very similar way to serving XML, although it's not quite as verbose. So there's a number of websites you can search. JSON.org, for example, has this example.html, and this on this page here you can see this a JavaScript, a JSON notation. Here we get the start and the end curly brackets, and then we've got a glossary node which has got inside it a title which has got example glossary, and then inside there it's got actually some sub properties in it. You can see here glossary divide has actually got another object inside it. We've got the start of object notation again, and that has a title, and then also in there another object, and we can see here this is the XML version of the same data shown above. So when we're working with this with real-world data, and this is an example of the APIs for the property cross, if we click here, we can see that we get back quite a lot of objects with data and bits populated in here. So we've got a request that's got a response, and we can see what we've requested, and we can see the response values that have come back, and then including in here is a listing of multiple properties. So this has got the array character here, this kind of square bracket which is indicating an array, and then multiple objects in that array. So the objects don't have a name, you don't know what type they are, it's just saying it's a listing and here's a list of objects within the listing. At least with XML you'd have the data to say what object type it was that you're actually reading into, so it's a little bit easier to work with in that respect. But if you know, most of the time it's you're going to have the same type of object being returned, and you can work your way through that with the JSON. But that's the pros and the cons of both. So let's actually go ahead and download this, and we'll programmatically pass this through and use it within our code. So here's one I made earlier, and on the form here I've just got a memo, and my first button's literally just going to fetch this URL and load it into this memo. Typically when we're working with JSON we need to go and fetch it. You may have the JSON in file, and if you have that then you just need to load it in to the point that you want to go and use it in another way. Now to do the fetching I've just added an ID HTTP, which is a component for fetching data from the web, and literally just in here just type in HTTP and you'll be able to find it under the Indy client components. So once we've got that on our form we can then just programmatically tell it to go and get this. So under button 1 we're literally just saying update the memo, set the text property to be, and then we're going to ask the HTTP control to go and get the URL that we've got typed in on the screen. So that's nice and easy. And then the second one here, on the button click, I'm going to create from the data.json.objects unit that's in that Code Central article. So these are the 4 files that you need to use within your project. So we specifically talk to these 2 here, which are using the others behind the scene. So we're going to create a parser to parse the JSON document, and once we've created it, we're then going to pass the JSON text property, the memo1 text, so what we've got typed in on the screen, we're going to pass that in. We're going to set the active flag on the document to true, and that's going to cause it to parse the document and create a set of objects internally. We're then able to check to make sure that we have got a document element, which is the root point of the JSON document, and as long as we have, then we're going to tell the list box that we're going to start updating it a lot, and we're going to then clear it. we're then going to load the node, the document element node, in and end our updates. Now this load node, I've just written a little inline procedure here. So within a method you can just write an inline procedure if you're only going to use it there, which keeps it nicely contained. So here we're just going to load in the path that we're passed plus the node that we're passed in. So we're going to start with an empty path because it's the root and the document element node, and then we're going to add that into the list. We're going to build up our path, and then we're going to add in the node name and its value, and we're then going to add through here all the attribute nodes. So the attribute nodes on the document here are these. So these are all attribute nodes, and then this is a child node. The child node has objects within it. And then we're going to loop through and we're going to tell each of the child nodes to go load itself using the updated path. So if we go ahead and run this, let's firstly just fetch our JSON, and there it is. So we could go ahead and just type whatever we want in here, but that's nice and quickly fetched. And button 2, there we are, we can see it's now passed that very quickly, and it tells us we've got a root node, and the root is just the root value is nothing, so there's no text value on the root, but we then got a root request node, and that has no value on it, but it has got a number of values set into it. So we can see here the root request node has a country, a language, a list type, a location, and so on. And then if we get down, we can see then we've got the root response node, and we can see the response code, and so on. So we can programmatically query through and ask for different values. Okay, so let's have a look at a couple of the other useful things when programmatically navigating a JSON document. So in here, let's take the document doc element, and let's ask it about its child nodes, and let's see if we can find the node. And we're going to find, let's have a look for the request node, because that's the first root, so we're going to have to ask it for the request. And let's put that to a node here, and that's if you push Control Shift V, that will then help you locate what type it is. It's normally pretty good. It's saying this is an iJSON node, so yep, we'll take that. That's an interface to a node. So I can then say, right, node. Well, let's just first check if we've got it. So if assigned node, or we could say if node is not equal to nil, same thing. Ooh. Then we can begin and end some little query here. So we can ask the node if it has an attribute. So we could ask for attributes straight away and pass in the value, but we need to know if it's there first. So we can say if it has an attribute called foo, then show message node dot attributes foo, and this is going to be passing back a variant. So we can do here var to string, and that will just convert the variant across to a string for us. So let's just compile. Oh, square brackets, because it's an index. So if we run that, we'll be able to see here that it hasn't got a property called foo. So let's just take one it has got. Let's take location. And let's go ahead and run that. And we can see there we're getting our message up for Maidenhead because it's managed to find one and carry on through. So it's very easy to be able to query these. There's other things that you can do. You can check for the accounts, so you can loop through them programmatically, using like we have done here. So yeah, working with the JSON documents is quite easy, but you need to understand and know a little bit about the structure of what's going to be in there in a different way to having the WSDL document that gives you a defined set of what that object contains. The nice thing about this, though, is obviously it's sometimes easier to change what you have got queried for, because you can do it programmatically without having to have extra declarations on the objects and so on. But pros and cons for both. Certainly, you've got the option to work with whichever you need. Okay, so that brings to the end of today's discussions, and I hope you found that very useful, learning about SOAP and how to work with SOAP servers and build SOAP clients. We've had a quick look at JSON there. Although that was on a desktop application, you can do exactly the same on the mobile side of things, and you can use that on both VCL, FireMonkey, console applications as well. So I think working with SOAP and JSON is great. It gives you a great chance to be able to extract out your business functionality and have that securely held in a middleware that not only your applications, but if you want to share that with other applications, you can make it available for people to be able to programmatically access into your services and even charge for your services that you've got in the middle there. So they're a great foundation for being able to do and work with mobile. Now, as always, the resources we've seen today are available up on the streaming.embarcadero.com microsite, along with the replays for the sessions. We'll be getting this lesson up as soon as it's finished in its second time slot, which is 10 a.m. Pacific Date Time to 11. So do go back and have a look through, and we are adding to those resources each week as well. So now time for some Q&A.